This is the free audiobook of Elemental Power, written and read for you by April Ames. If you haven't read the previous chapters, please click the link in the description or in the pinned comment. That will take you to the playlist. There you can start at Chapter 1 or pick up where you left off. Part 1. Shattered. Chapter 2. Wine for the Wounded. Just when I thought I couldn't walk another step, a roof came into view through the trees. It was a large treehouse built high among the ancient branches, with a swirling wooden staircase leading to the door. Golden light shone from every window. The sky above had abandoned the blush of sunset for the deep indigo of nightfall. A sense of security passed over me when I saw it, and I sighed deeply, relishing the prospect of warmth. The resultant wave of pain snatched away my breath with hateful vengeance. The stranger pulled me up each of the many steps until the carved wooden doors were within reach. I felt lightheaded. It was too much. "Welcome to Sanctuary," he said. His smile beamed as warmly as the windows of his home. "I'll get you some clothes and some tea." He opened the door and turned to me with a gallant sweep of his free arm. I stepped through the doorway and into a room made entirely of wood. Everything came from a natural source. The floors, walls, and ceilings were all paneled in a warm maple. There was no chrome in the kitchen, no electronics of any kind. The dazzling welcome that had trickled through the windows into the woods below was all firelight. The room was amber-tinged, cozy, and the warmth of it spread over me. "It's beautiful," I croaked, completely unable to continue moving. The man walked forward a step, trying to lead me further into the house, but I remained rooted to the spot, motionless and staring. He stooped down and picked me up like a sleeping child, and I didn't protest. The cloak fell apart slightly and I snatched it back together. He didn't notice, moving me deeper into the warmth of the room. He carried me to a purple lounge chair, close to a roaring fire and a giant stone hearth. A moment later, I felt a fluffy quilt being spread over me, the heat of the fire stored within it. Kneeling down beside me, he studied my face, or what was left of it. He drew in a long, deep breath and seemed to brace himself. "My name is Glenn Ellenville," he said. "And if you tell me who did this to you, I swear, by all that is holy, that I will find them. Tell me who did this, and they will die." I smiled at that, appreciative of the sentiment, but discouraged at having no way to identify my enemies. I met his gaze and sighed. He walked away after waiting for an answer that never came. I wished I had something to tell him, some way to get revenge on those who had done this to me, but I had nothing to say. I was empty. Sleep pulled me back down as I grew warm in the glow of the fire. I felt a hand gently shake my shoulder, coaxing me from the void. "I'm sorry to wake you," Glenn's voice. I came sharply awake, disoriented, but quickly recalled to reality thanks to the overwhelming pain. I looked up into his lean face. His eyebrows were lifted in sympathy, oddly higher over the bridge of his nose and slanting down toward his temples. "I brought you some tea," he said, holding a delicate porcelain cup. "Do you take sugar?" "Yes, please," I said, though speaking was growing more difficult as I thawed and began to swell. His eyes lingered on my face for a moment too long before placing sugar in the tea and stirring. I watched him intently, trying to get a better impression of him. I was lying on his chair, completely vulnerable. He'd come to my rescue, but aside from that and his name, he was as big a mystery as my own identity. I pulled the quilt tighter around me. He glanced up as I did. The creases around his eyes spoke of grief, not mirth. I studied the walls to avoid his gaze. There were no pictures hanging there, no family portraits, at least not in the room I occupied at present. This place was not a home. His eyes kept sliding over to me. It was taking effort for him to keep from staring. I took the offered cup and let it warm my hands, breathing in the steam. I had dreamed in the few moments of rest here. I had seen my face before. I remembered how unswollen it had been and reached up to feel what I had become. "You mentioned clothes," I said, startling him. "Yes." He leapt to his feet, moving quickly into a room behind me. I moved very slowly, but managed to stand up and cover myself before he came back into the main room, arms loaded with dresses. He stopped abruptly, seeing me standing there, and looked a little confused. "Do you have a mirror?" I asked, setting down the teacup. Uncertainty flickered across his face, only for a moment. Then apprehension replaced it and lingered in his eyes. He looked down at me, stepped backward 2 paces, and gestured me into the room he had just come from. I held my blanket tightly around me and limped past him into the little bedroom. A full-length mirror was in the far corner. I took a step toward it. He touched my shoulder. I flinched away and turned to look up at him. He didn't speak, just viewed me with something like pleading in his pointy features. Slowly, his eyes slid from my face to the mirror, then back. They still held that note of apprehension. "That bad, is it?" He nodded. I turned away again, with purpose, and crossed the room as quickly as I could. I stood in front of the mirror with my eyes tightly shut, even though it was excruciating, bracing myself for what I would see when they opened. I heard Glenn take a quick inward breath, set down his bundle, and walk out of the room, shutting the door behind him. Glancing back to make sure I was alone, I turned and let my wrappings fall to the floor. With a deep, steadying breath, I looked into the mirror. My hair was black and wavy, matted with blood and leaves, tangled and filthy. My skin was ghastly shades of blue, purple, and black, with hints of sickly greenish yellow filling in the gaps. My delicate nose was swollen and crusted, eyes merely watery slits in the swelling that distorted every feature of my face. The only thing I could recognize was my defined jawline, but even that was covered in bruises. Just below my chin grinned the knife wound where they had drained my blood, stretching along the crease of my neck, jagged and red. I was gripped by sudden despair and stood shaking, not letting myself look away or crumble, determined to see the full extent of the damage. My body was much the same as my face, corpse-colored and slashed over nearly every surface. I turned to look at my backside and was horrified to see grass and leaves sticking to the fleshy grooves of exposed tissue. My entire back was flayed apart like a skirt steak in a butcher shop. I could foresee myself dying slowly of infection from those wounds alone. There was a tattoo on my right buttock. I wiped away the filth to inspect it. The thing was crudely done, a triangle with an eye at the top. I didn't remember getting that, but then I didn't remember anything. Morbid curiosity thus satisfied, I hobbled over to the pile of clothing. After wiping my hands on Glenn's cloak to remove some filth, I began to sift through the pile. My choices consisted of beautiful embroidered dresses, some linen, some silk, but all much too lovely to put on in this state. I noticed a wooden dresser along the back wall and went to search the drawers. After rootling around, I found a clean muslin nightdress that tied in the back. I managed to slip it on, then I opened the bedroom door and peeked out. Glenn was sitting in a chair next to the lounge, visibly seething. His hands were clenched so tightly that I could see the whiteness of his knuckles. I cleared my throat and regretted it. He looked up and saw me there, unclenched his fists, took a deep breath, picked up my teacup, and brought it to me. He seemed ashamed at having been thus discovered. He avoided eye contact when he handed me the still steaming cup. "Are you all right?" I asked, taking a sip. The tea was warm, sweet, and made my stomach growl so loudly that he laughed in what came out as a breathy before answering, "Am I all right? My goodness, you're walking roadkill, and you ask me if I'm all right." He half laughed again and looked down at his boots. He was shaking his head, hands clasped in front of him. I took a larger gulp, ravenous for anything. He looked back at me, searching the blood-ringed slits that passed from my eyes, and I smiled weakly at him. "Do you have any food?" I asked for the second time, as my stomach asserted itself again. "Yes, of course," he answered, turning away. "I have several bunches of bananas, and dates, if you prefer. I thought you might not want anything difficult to chew." That's thoughtful of you, I remarked over my nearly empty teacup. But I still have all my teeth. I grinned in what must have been a disturbing sight, as many splits in my lips reopened, blood welling and filling the grooves between my teeth. I realized that while I did indeed have all my teeth, some were loose in my gums. I'd love something hot. Do you have soup? A drop of blood slid down my chin. Glenn shook his head briefly, then went and wet a small towel before coming back to me and pressing the towel to my lips. No, we don't cook food here. I pushed his ministrations away. You don't? What do you eat? I was flabbergasted and instantly craved a bloody steak. We have the gardens, vast and beautiful gardens. We grow all our food there, and we eat only what is fresh. Some do cook their food lightly, mostly in the frozen north. Others even kill animals and eat them, though they tend not to be the nicest of creatures. I frowned, causing more blood to well up. I didn't know why, but I had the distinct feeling that I ate animals, or had before. He put the towel to my mouth again. Don't smile or frown, please. Not until your lips heal. I took the towel from him and pressed it to my mouth. Speaking of healing, I need your help. I turned my back to him and pulled the thin fabric down from my shoulders a little way, showing him a glimpse of the horror that had been done to me. Glenn swallowed thickly before drawing in a ragged breath. I felt oddly insulted, hearing his abhorrence, as if he could be anything but horrified. My shoulders stiffened. Sensing it, he moved into my field of vision. I saw that his apologetic smile held shining pearls of pity. He motioned me over to the bench at the kitchen table and served me 3 bunches of bananas. I could smell them, all speckled brown and ripe, and my mouth began to water. Questions fled in the force of my hunger. I devoured. I was so busy stuffing my swollen face, in fact, that I didn't notice him pull up a stool behind me. Your wounds need to be cleaned. This will hurt, he said. Just do it, I muttered with my mouth full of mushy fruit. I was more concerned about my next bite than pain at the moment. He pulled the gown from my shoulders all the way down to my waist with the impersonal authority of a doctor. I felt him squeeze a cloth full of warm water on the nape of my neck, letting it wash down my back and drip onto the floor. It carried away the filth and swirled like claret, seeping into and between the wooden boards of his home. It hurt more than I could have imagined, but I focused on my breath and the food, and he worked silently, gently, picking random bits of forest from my wounds. After a while, I noticed he was becoming less gentle. His fingers dug a little further into my flesh than necessary. His breath was shallow and hot, quick and ragged. He pulled a twig from my wound without tenderness, and it scraped down the edge of a gash, making me jump. I dropped the banana with a squishy thud onto the table and gasped through clenched teeth. He froze. What's the matter? I asked when the pain subsided and I could take a breath again. I didn't look back, thought it best to keep my eyes on my meal. The stack of sticky peels was a neutral place to stare. I remembered suddenly that I didn't know this man. I was at his mercy, and he was clearly having issues. He didn't answer for a moment, and I lifted the fruit for another bite as he spoke with intentional calmness. There's nothing I can do to help. If I could avenge you, that would be better than sitting here playing healer. As it is, he stirred, beginning to work again. It just reminds me. Silence. Only the dripping water and my own chewing met my ears for a long while. My back stung and my body ached. The bananas were doing their job, though, and I felt my stomach turn right side out. It was an awkward silence, and I shifted uncomfortably, suddenly self-conscious. I was married once, he said, so quietly I almost missed it. I nodded, not wanting to move. That must have been why he had so many dresses on hand, I thought. She's dead. The words were spat out coldly, as if it was just a fact, an impersonal tidbit. He pulled the gown back onto my shoulders, and I heard the chair scrape against the boards as he pushed away. I turned to face him. I could see bags of sorrow beneath eyes gone pink and watery with repressed pain. Such agony festered there. I had no help to offer, so I remained silent. Those clothes I offered you, the nightgown you're wearing now, they were hers. I felt terrible wearing anything belonging to his late wife. It felt like I was walking on her grave. I'm sorry for your loss. Why don't you give me one of your shirts to wear instead? I don't want to bloody up her beautiful things. Yes, all right, he said and nodded, wiping his nose with the back of his sleeve. He breathed out sharply and nodded again. Not that I mind you wearing her dresses. Only, if you're going to stain something, it may as well be one of my old tunics. I nodded, my own ills temporarily forgotten. At least, whatever I had lost, I couldn't remember it. You reminded me of her, he said. There, in the leaves. I saw you stir while I was on my way to see a friend. If not for the odd coloring of your skin, I might have passed you by. He shivered, distressed by the thought. I almost wish you had. What was her name? Lillian. He said the name gingerly, as if it would burn him. I looked at him with as much gratitude as I could manage to show through my distorted features. Glenn nodded, smiled in that half-frowning way, and closed his eyes, leaning away from me. I swiveled back to my dwindling pile of fruit. He stood, set 2 more bunches in front of me without comment, and I continued to eat. He sat down by the fire, alone. Later, with my stomach full, my back cleaned out, and warmer than I could have hoped, I turned to face him. Is there any way I could take a bath? I asked. Oh, yes, of course, he answered with a tiny smile, coming to clear away the table. You'll lose more blood, though. You should just spot clean with this. He handed me the rag and bucket he had used for my back. But let me freshen them up a bit, he added, seeing bits of leaf and twig floating in the water and the blood stains on the cloth. Okay, I said and waited, looking at the filth crusting my arms. Movement made the scabs crack and pull at the tiny hairs. I desperately wanted to be clean. Glenn returned with fresh hot water, a stack of clean rags, towels, and a bar of pleasantly scented soap. I brought the bar up to my nose, sniffing deeply, only able to catch the ghost of fragrance through my congested sinuses. That's oatmeal soap, with curing herbs and oils. The healer of the village recommends it, he said, stepping back to allow me room to stand. Thank you. He nodded, turning to tidy the kitchen. I reached up to run a hand through my hair, but stopped as the wounds in my back protested. Now free of debris, they were angry and raw. I let out a cry of pain, and he spun around to see me with my hand stuck in place, leaning with the other one on the table to keep my buckled knees from sending me to the floor. He pulled my hand free and set a large wooden bowl, half full of warm water, on the table. Wait, he said. Leaving the room momentarily, he returned with a wooden flask marked hair tonic. I carefully lowered my head over the bowl. The water began uncrusting my scalp. He applied the hair tonic gently. It smelled wonderful and only stung a little. What's in the shampoo? I asked. His hands stilled for a moment, then resumed their pleasant rhythm. Shampoo? Do you mean the hair tonic? Yep, that. We call it shampoo where I come from. And where is that? He asked. Well, I began and paused. I have no idea. He made a noise of puzzled acceptance. I frowned, face down in the basin, breathing in the sweet smell of the lather. I don't know why I can remember random words, but can't remember my name, my family, how I got here, or anything of actual importance. All I know is what I've dreamed about since arriving here. When you dream, you remember? I think so. It feels like a memory. I snorted as my nose touched and rippled the water. You wouldn't believe this, but I don't always look like a corpse. He was silent for a moment, then said, I believe it. He wrapped a soft towel around my hair, twisted it neatly, and sent me to the bedroom with the bucket and rags to tend myself in privacy. This time I intentionally avoided my reflection and cleaned by feel everywhere I could reach. My feet were dark with dirt, and it was a relief to have them pink and clean again. The soap smelled like gardenias and honey, and the lather was thick and effective at scrubbing off the grime. There was a knock at the door, and Glenn said through it, I set some ointment and a clean tunic out here for you. The ointment will relieve the pain. Try to reach what you can, and I'll apply it to your back when you come out. I have something else that may help, too. I cracked open the door and retrieved the bundle. It was a real task applying the greasy cream by myself. My limbs were stiff and swollen, uncooperative with my contortions. The ointment smelled spicy with a hint of vanilla. With the stuff applied everywhere possible, an old linen tunic draped around me like a dress and tied with a bit of rope at my waist, I stepped back into the brightness of the main room. "Glenn, where would I go to, relieve myself?" I asked, dancing from foot to foot. "That door there." He pointed to a place just past the kitchen. I nodded thanks and went to do my business. The facilities weren't as primitive as I thought they would be. At least the room was in the house, not outside. There was running water and a toilet that could flush. The tub was inviting, large enough to truly submerge myself, but the thought of my back touching anything was unbearable. I heaved a sigh of relief once the pressure in my bladder eased, and I looked around for toilet paper. There was none. There was, however, little bits of rags and torn-up clothing to hand, so I used one of those and hoped it wouldn't clog. It didn't, and I went back to the main room refreshed and relieved. Glenn was sitting on a well-loved green chair beside the purple lounge with a wine bottle in his hand. I sat gingerly, pulled a fresh quilt around me, and cocked an inquisitive eyebrow at the lavender liquid. I instantly regretted the movement. I had applied the ointment all over my face, but it still hurt to move. "This is the best wine in the world," he said, as he poured 2 crystal goblets full. I took the glass he offered and asked, "What is it?" He put his prominent nose into his glass and inhaled. "Morningberry wine. The morning berries only grow here, in the East. Once fermented, they become the finest wine known to any living creature. Inhale the fragrance, sip slowly, and let the healing power of the morning sun flow into you." I sniffed and was enchanted to find it pleasantly floral with cherry notes. I essayed a cautious sip and let it swirl in my mouth for a moment, ignoring the protests of my mouth wounds. It was wonderful, reminiscent of regular wine, Riesling perhaps, but with deep purple flavors. It really did spread through me, and I felt my aching limbs ease and relax at last. Smiling dreamily, I slouched and let my back touch the lounge but snapped up again, hissing in air through clenched teeth. "Would you put some of that ointment on my back, please?" I stood, using the quilt for modesty, and untied the rope around my waist. Sitting with my back to him, I carefully lifted the tunic up over my head, keeping my front half covered. I glanced over my shoulder at him, expectant. He pulled some linen bandages from under his chair, and in a businesslike manner, proceeded to doctor my back with gentle skill. When he finished, and the tunic was back on and tied, I eased back onto the lounge and found it comfortable. A smile spread across my face, and it still hurt, but less now. I took a deeper gulp of the wine, then another, anxious to be pain-free. "Glenn, I'd be owl food now if it wasn't for you." He tipped his glass to me with a dark look and a quiet shiver, and we drank together quietly for a bit. The wine went straight to my head, having very little blood to corrupt, and I slipped into a dreamless sleep. I half awoke to find myself being carried, once again like a child, and softly landing on the bed upon my side in the little room with the mirror. I began to drift back into the place where healing happens. Outside the moonlit window, perched on a branch, an owl watched me sleep. I noticed it through the fog of exhaustion. As oblivion overtook me, I thought the owl's eyes had turned red, but I was too far gone to care. If you enjoyed this chapter, please give it a like and/or a comment. It really helps us out. And if you think someone else might enjoy the story, please share with them the first chapter. You'll always find it in the description and pinned in the comments. If you subscribe and turn the notification bell on, you'll be the first to know when the new chapter is released. I'll release 1 chapter every week until the audiobook is finished.